So, Sally, what time should we begin? Maybe give another 1 minute for more people to join.
Bagaimana dari Mas Angga? Apakah sudah bisa kita mulai atau masih menunggu beberapa partisipan lagi, Mas Angga?
Mas Angga,
Eh,
ceritanya gimana?
Iya.
Bu Laili, bagaimana ya? Kalau misal mau dimulai, monggo. Karena jadwalnya memang jam 1 ya.
Jam 1, kita mulai sekarang.
Ya.
Atau kita masih menunggu? Jika pembicara sudah lengkap.
Pesertanya berapa enggak yang daftar tuh?
Kemarin di pendaftaran ada sekitar 30-an.
30-an ya?
Iya.
30. Oh, ya udah. Nggak apa-apa, dimulai aja.
Oke, baik. Izin Pak Najib, Ibu Laili, kita mulai acaranya. Oke, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, our session is about to begin. Kindly follow conduct of guidance during the webinar. Kindly fill list of attendance through chat link in the chat room. If you have questions for the speakers, please write down through Q&A. Visit by format, your institution, and your name. Presentation materials will be distributed at the end of discussion through chat link in chat room. And for participants to turn off the microphone when the speaker is giving a presentation. Thank you for your cooperation. Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Allow me to extend your warmest greeting to our eminent speaker and guest for today. Chairman of Research Organization for Social Science and Humanities, National Research and Innovation Agency, Professor Dr. Ahmad Najib Burhani, Head of Research Center of Law, National Research and Innovation Agency, Dr. Laili Nurhidayah, SHLLM, moderator, all distinguished guests, institution representative, and all participants. Welcoming to workshop Tropical Peatland Restoration in Indonesia, a social, legal, and ecological perspective. My name is Serwi Julianti. Precious chance for me today to be your master of ceremony. Before starting workshop today, allow me to invite Chairman of Research Organization for Social Science and Humanities, Professor Dr. Ahmad Najib Burhani, to deliver his speech. Please welcome Mr. Ahmad Najib Burhani. Time is yours.
Thank you, Mbak Sally. Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. On behalf of the Institute of Social Sciences and Humanities, National Research and Innovation Agency, BRIN, I would like to thank NTU and also Research Center for Law for hosting this important workshop, and also for all speakers for joining and also sharing their research in this workshop. As mentioned in the title of this workshop, Tropical Peatland Restoration in Indonesia, a social, legal, and economical perspective. I think this is very timely and also important for these countries, Indonesia and Singapore. And I was there for 4 years at the ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute, and I can feel, for instance, sometimes the haze during the forest fires in Indonesia, and that perhaps for some people obscure the visibility to see anything, something like that. And we know that peatland restoration is a commitment of Indonesia to prevent land and forest fires and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Much of the country emissions come from deforestation and land use change, including clearing peatland for oil palm plantation and mangroves for shrimps and fish farm. Indonesia is a home to over a third of the world's tropical peatlands, half of which have already been altered through drainage, deforestation, forestation, and agriculture-related burning. Indonesia has pledged to restore over 2 million hectares of degraded peatlands in 2016 until 2020 under BRG, and 1.5 million hectares of degraded peatlands in 2020 until 2024 under BRGM. Ladies and gentlemen, participants and also speakers, peatland restoration is a complex issue. It is not only involving restoring biophysics through rewetting and revegetation. It is also a social dimension, as many people have lived and depend their livelihood on peatland areas. Putting people first is a vital part of the equation for protecting and restoring Indonesia's vast tropical peatlands. Why people matter? Without commitment of the people in the peatlands and other stakeholders, government, civil society, NGO, academics, we cannot sustainably restore peatlands. The objective of this workshop is to discuss research finding on tropical peatlands restoration in Indonesia from a social, legal, and ecological perspective. It is timely to discuss the update and progress on peatland restoration. BRIN and previously LIPI has conducted several research on peatland restoration, both from social, legal issues to biological perspective. Rumah Program, this is the name of research umbrella under the Institute of Social Sciences and Humanities, and also under the BRIN in general, has several research relating to peatland, including research on food estate in Central Kalimantan. NTU was also conducting similar research on peatland restoration, social and ecological perspective. From this workshop, we will be able to draw a lesson learned, and provide recommendation for government and policymakers. In addition, the dissemination of the current cutting-edge research on peatland hopefully will bring more collaborative work between institutions, BRIN and NTU, to produce highly international publication. Again, I would like to thank speakers, Ibu Hesti Lestari, Mbak Leli Nurhidayah, Mbak Yuti Aryani Fatimah, Pak Agus Yasin, Stuart Smith, Weng Ngailam, Nur Esti Rahman, and also, of course, Janice Lee from NTU. And I wish you all a successful and productive workshop. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mr. Najib. Ladies and gentlemen, next speak from Mrs. Janice Lee, Assistant Professor from the Asian School Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Time is yours.
Thanks very much, Sally, and also Dr. Lubani for the opening remarks. I will just share some slides to introduce what we have done based on what was previously shared. So as mentioned, our team at NTU had also started working on peatland restoration at around 2019 when we received a research fund from the Singaporean Ministry of Education. So this research fund would be ending actually in about 2 weeks from now. And I'm very glad to share in this webinar together with the research team what we have done for the last couple of years. So we have had a great research team, including Nur Estia Rahman, Yuti Fatima, Stuart Smith, and also Weng Ngailam, with the supervision also of our many collaborators and also our co-PIs like David Waddle, Kwek Yen Chong, and also many collaborators from Indonesia. For example, Asmadi Saad, Hamza, Zainuddin Prasojo, Lady Nuhidayah, who's here as well, Richard Napi Tupulu, and also Singli Kiam, who's actually at the University of Tennessee. So as what was mentioned by Dr. Nubani, smoke haze is something that we experience also in Singapore and also in the capitals of Malaysia, like in Kuala Lumpur. And, this is an issue that has been around for quite some time. And the issue of peatland restoration is a very important one in order to try to stem the problem of the transboundary haze pollution. So just to look at the figures over time, this is the yearly emissions, specifically for 2019 in red and also 2015 in yellow. And if you can see, the gray bars represent the average emissions from 2003 to 2018. So these 2 years from 2015 and 2019 really show very high emissions during the dry season in Indonesia that had triggered international attention to the issue of the transboundary haze, and also led to very strong action from the Indonesian government to set up peatland restoration action with agencies like the Badan Restorasi Gambut, which had been revamped as well to include mangroves, I think just in the last 2 years in 2020. So the techniques that have been specified in this peatland restoration agency include these 3 Rs, which I think many people are really very aware of: rewetting, revegetation, and also revitalization of livelihoods. And I think our team, when we started off wanting to look into this topic, we were very curious to find out more about how these different techniques are linked to each other, specifically trying to understand a bit more about livelihoods and also how it's linked to successful revegetation of tropical peat swamp forest. So we did set out in 2019 to do quite a few pilot studies on tropical peatlands, especially in Jambi. However, because of COVID that hit us in 2020, we were unable to actually carry out a lot of the field work that we had planned to do so. So instead, the team had to readjust their strategy and also their research projects, which is summarized in this research poster here. We won't be going through all these projects. However, I think some of the speakers today will elaborate more about the projects 1, 2, and also I think 3, to tell you more about what we've been doing on the social and also the ecological side of tropical peatland restoration. If you're interested, I can share these links here. These links would bring you to the posters, both in English and also in Bahasa. And if you scan the QR code here, you have a voice recording that guides you through these different projects in this poster. So for today's schedule, after the opening remarks, we'll be going into session 1, which will be discussing tropical peatland restoration from a social-legal perspective. So we have our speakers, both from BRIN and also from NTU, Dr. Lady Nuhidaya, Dr. Hesti Leotata, and also UT Fatima. And each of them will give a 15-minute presentation, followed by a Q&A and also a discussion for about 15 minutes. And after this session 1, we'll go into session 2, which is led by or moderated by UT Fatima. And in this session, we have Wing Nai Lam and also Nur Raman from NTU, Agus Yassin, who is from BRGM, and also Stuart Smith, who is previously also from NTU. So there will be a Q&A and also a discussion at the end of all of these talks, which I hope you will find interesting. And if you have any questions, feel free to post them on the chat. And as the moderators, we would be happy to share them. So that's it from me. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, now we proceed to the presentation and discussion. I believe the session that you are waiting for. Without further ado, I would like to invite again Mrs. Janice Lee to guide the discussion within topic tropical peatland restoration in Indonesia, a social and legal perspective. Mrs. Janice Lee, the floor is yours to discussion.
Great, thanks very much, Sally. So here we have our session 1 on social and legal perspectives, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Lady Nuhidaya. She is the researcher and head of Research Center for Law, Institute for Social Sciences and Humanities at BRIN. So Dr. Nuhidaya had obtained her PhD in law from Macquarie University, Sydney, Australia, and also an LLM advanced from the University of Queensland and bachelor's degree from Jenderal Sudirman University. Her research interests focus on the areas of international environmental law, marine and coastal governance, and forest governance in Indonesia, and climate change adaptation. Her PhD thesis is on transboundary haze pollution in the ASEAN region, the assessment of the adequacy of legal frameworks in Indonesia, where she has since contributed in the literature on peatland and also forest fires and haze pollution in Indonesia. So without further ado, I would invite Dr. Nur Hidayah to share her screen and also to begin her presentation. So, Dr.
Yeah, can you hear me? Wait.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So for today's presentation, actually, I would like to share my current research on food security and how it's related to the peatland restoration. So it is assessing the implication of food estate program in Central Kalimantan on social, legal, and ecological aspect. Actually, this is part of Rumah program research project. So assessing two location. One is in Central Kalimantan and the other is in North Sumatra. But for the peatland restoration, it is only in Central Kalimantan because Central Kalimantan is one of priority of peatland restoration in Indonesia. So first of all, the issue of the launch of food estate program in Central Kalimantan actually has created pro and cons in the society, particularly for the civil society, where they rejected the government idea to have food estate program in Central Kalimantan because basically there are fear that the government will repeat again the same mistake on previous failure of the opening peatland for ex-mega rice project, 1 million hectare mega project in Central Kalimantan, which has created environmental damage, increase of greenhouse gas emission, loss of biodiversity, and land-tenure conflict within local other community. So for this, in the beginning of the food estate program, there also a petition on no food estate in peat forest in Borneo from NGO coalition. Like there's 163 NGO who signed this petition. There's no food estate in Central Kalimantan. Another controversy is also when the government issued the allowance of opening protected forest for food estate through the Ministry of Forest Regulation number 24/2020 on the forest for food estate. So this is like a competing policy between increasing the food production and also reducing the greenhouse gas emission. There is some vision actually. The government want to have like a food security and food sovereignty for national level, and also they want to have to reduce dependency of the import of several products. However, the thing is, some of the people say, why Central Kalimantan? I mean, it's already failure in the past. Why they choose again to be a location for food estate? The idea here is how to balance the food security, achieving the food security, also the sustainability. So how is the implementation of food estate in Central Kalimantan? Actually, it is more top-down approach, like all the policy vision and implementation all is from central government, while local government is only follow the central government level vision and mission. So there should be like a need to shift to more hybrid governance, where the local local farmer have the right to have decision making, not only from central government. So rice is a core product in Central Kalimantan, so it's the main plantation to be planted in community land. So it is planted in community lands, non-forested area, so it is not on forest area. There's two program for the food estate. First, intensification. This is located in transmigran area, like in Pangkok. For intensification, there's no, I think there's a little problem because they already established the rice there, and Peatland is already like 40 years. They already manage these peatland areas and become a rice producer for Central Kalimantan. So for this intensification, there's no problem, but extensification with the opening the land, which is peatland in indigenous Dayak communities in Block C and Block A PLG, it's create a little bit difficulties, barrier, because indigenous community doesn't have any not interest. I mean, they usually to do shifting cultivation, slash and burning activities to have rice, but now they should planted the rice with the intensive farming, so it is difficult. I mean, this is not they used not to do it. Another development for the food estate, including infrastructure development like dam, road, irrigation, and also land certification. So with the problem of extensification, actually the area, it is they make like AOI, area of interest. This mapping is come from a government level. So with the government level, there's an overlapping claim at the ground level. Like for example, in the ground level, this is oil palm plantation, but in the AOI, it should be like for the food estate. So there should be like many areas. For example, like here 743, which is the ILI for mapping for the food estate, but then it reduced again to 165,000 hectare, and the one that's already planted is only 30,000 hectares. So 743 is just like the question, where's this number come from, and then where is the location? So the amount that the number is only smaller, like 30,000 for this already planted. In addition, there's a lack transparency, and then local communities land that have been included in the area of interest, but in the implementation, they refuse to have their land to be open for food estate for rice. They prefer to have their rubber plantation instead, rather than opening for food estate. So the village level, that they should find another place that's open, willingly open for food estate. Some of the conflict tension is comes because this rubber plantation is already like open by the military, but the farmers is refused to have this land to be converted into food estate. So in the legal framework itself, the governance of food estate is already stated in presidential regulation number 109/2020 on the acceleration of priority program PSN, and then the Ministry of Environment and Policy on forest for food estate. But however, there is not yet any regulation on master plan of food estate and also institutional framework. In the harmonization of food estate and peatland restoration, actually, in the food estate, the deep peatland and peat dome areas in the mapping, they are excluded from opening for food estate. through the government regulation number 57/2006 on the protection of peatland ecosystem, peatdom should be conserved, like 30% should be conserved for conservation, and also deep peatland. Then another harmonization is no burning method in opening a land for food estate, like law number 32/2009. Actually, they regulate no burning, but actually for other communities, they still allow to have opening the land with the burning. But with the food estate, no burning allow for opening the land for food estate. So in the socio-cultural implication, like I mentioned before, that local diet communities is not familiar with the intensive rice farming. So it is just like a social cultural gap. They used to have slash and burn, and then system cultivation with the planting local rice strain. And the local also much prefer to work in other jobs such as fishing, and then rubber plantation, oil palm as labor in oil palm companies, rather than intensive rice farming. So there are three possible outcomes from the opening of the land for food estate. First is the land will be back to the shrub area, and there's many cases that the land back to the shrub area. And second is there's possibility in the future that the land will be changed to oil palm plantation. To the, they planted other than rice. And then the third is there will be sell because the land has been certificate. So there's possibility also the land will be sell to maybe to oil palm companies or others. Another problem is with the new opening land in peatland with no burning. There's a high cost production, but less harvest and less production for new opening. So some of the previous project of food estate with opening land in peatland areas, they have limited success to have a good harvest for rice. And another problem is that the areas that plan to be open is too large. So actually there's a little success for the opening peatland for rice. So there should be need a demonstration plot first for center of excellence. Another problem is that the traditional, they have a traditional knowledge to have a planting rice for twice a year. But then the government pushed to have more productive PT, like to increase to 3 times a year or to 4 times a year. And then in the implementation, they fail to have this three times a year production. In the environmental implication, deep peatland areas and peatdom, actually, they are excluded from food estate. Like one of the village in Tumbang Nusa, they want also to have like their land to be open for food estate, but then the expert from the study of investigation has examined that area is a deep peatland area. So they refuse the proposal from the village to have their area to be open for food estate. And also there's an attempt to integrate like peatland restoration and food estate with the no burning techniques, but still we still need to wait and see how the result of this rice production in the peatland area, because in the intensification, usually the transmigran that the job actually like from Java, they used to have rice for plantation, but for Dayak communities, which is actually they are jealous because of some of transmigran get this food estate, but their area not. So the government also open in the Dayak communities, but they're not really familiar with this intensive farming. So this is create difficulties. And another implication for the environmental is even it is not a forested area, like it is not protected forest, but it still have risk of deforestation and forest degradation. And in another statement from the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, with the forest area that will convert to food estate, they say they will use it for agri-forestry products. So it is not, it will not open for rice farming, but it is for agroforestry. Another problem is with the flooding in the Block A area. It is still flooding, so the local farmers cannot plant the rice. It is because of one is peatland, and the other is because the irrigation from the ministry is not complete, and it's create another flooding, which is in that case is 2 years they cannot plant the rice. And I really don't know now, but they try to solve this flooding in their peatland areas. For conclusion, food estate in peatland areas actually is challenging, especially for extensification program. And the opening the land with the burning also still challenging for Dayak Adat communities, as they not used to this kind of farming, so they used to shifting cultivation, and precautionary principle should be applied for deep peatland and peat dome area, which should be excluded from food estate. I think that's all for my presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Nuhidaya. Thank you for telling us more about the food estate program that's happening in Central Kalimantan. Next up, we will be inviting Dr. Hesti Al-Tata, who is a researcher of the Research Center for Ecology and Animal Biology of BRIN. So Dr. Hesti is a principal researcher of Research Center for Ecology and Animal Biology for BRIN. She has a PhD from Utrecht University, Netherlands, with educational background of plant ecology and also biodiversity. She has a lot of working experience in lowland tropical forests and peatlands in the field of silviculture, agroforestry, and paludiculture. And she's also very familiar working with farmers and local stakeholders in the implementation of research action projects. She published many scientific articles in international journals, book chapters, and also several books. And today, I think Dr. Hesti will be talking more about paludiculture, especially the issue of social inclusion. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Hesti to share her slides.
Thank you very much, Denise. I would like to share my screen. Good afternoon, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen. Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen. I think you could probably try to expand it by clicking on.
Thank you very much. Sorry, because I'm afraid my connection is not good, so I
could try to switch off your video. Yeah, if it's not
I
very
will
good.
continue.
Okay.
Sorry. I just continue. Okay, thank you very much. As the outline of my presentation, I will give the background, give definition of agriculture, stakeholder analysis, economic instrument for support the social inclusion and the construction. As a background, and as we know that in the global agreement socio-ecological restoration is engaged with the sustainable development goals, and ecological restoration needs a meaningful stakeholder relation. It requires synergetic and harmonious collaboration among related stakeholders. Although many stakeholders have taken part in this effort, only a few of them are aware of their potential role that can be contributed to the action. Like we often see in the news, in the newsletter that reported that restoration failed. It is the failure of ecosystem restoration usually occur where lack of social inclusion and community engagement. The three are approaches that already mentioned before in peatland restoration in Indonesia, work toward the improvement of biophysical characteristic and also raise livelihood of rural communities. Agriculture is one of the 5 programs in the community-based peatland conservation and restoration program. Here is the brief what we call about agriculture. It is a productive use of wet and irrigated peatland in a way that the feedstock is long-term preserved by maintaining a high water table throughout the year. It gives 5 benefits such as reducing accident, emission reduction, improving livelihood, species conservation, and fire prevention because of the high water table. And agriculture also have challenges in the implementation because not many marketable goods are available and familiar for the community, and many less marketable goods and the ecosystem services providing, regulating cultural and sporting, and it has a long value chain. And there is also challenges in social inclusion, including the community engagement and stakeholder inclusion. So we need to do mapping of power and interest of the stakeholder. We already did the study on stakeholder mapping of peatland restoration in Jambi, like a study of Tanjung Jabung Barat Regency in Jambi, and it is already published this year. The objective of the study is to study the role of stakeholders who concerned with peatland restoration and to map their contextual role to succeed the restoration, particularly in Jambi. The result we got that we also conducted the observation on biophysical and socio-economic condition. The Gram Itam Forest Management Unit under the Forestry Service of Jambi Province is considered as a low depth of peatland, only ranging from 50 centimeter to 200 centimeter. And mostly it is dominated by the agroforest of coffee, betel nut, agroforest oil palm and Dera Polyphila, oil palm monoculture, betel nut monoculture, agriculture and shrub. And it already occupied by migrant farmers since 2009. With the long process, the forestry district officer has successfully approached the migrant farmer to raise their awareness for the status of the forest land, function of the forest reserve, and importance of fire prevention. So in the peatland restoration and stakeholder who are involved, the governor developed the RGD in restorasi gambut daerah, and it is included the regional secretary of Jambi Province, regional planning development agency like Bapeda, Dishub, Dinas LH, Environment Office, BPDAS, River Basin Management Agency of Batanghari, Berbak Sembilang National Park, Natural Resources Conservation Agency, BSDA, BWS, Balai Wilayah Sungai, Public Work Office, Dinas PU, Estate Crop Office, Dinas Perkebunan, and Indonesian Palm Oil Business Association, Indonesian Forest Entrepreneur Association, and Jambi Trans Land and Water Conservation Society. And we conducted the interview, and this is the step of the study that we conducted. First, the stakeholder analysis. It is divided position of stakeholder and into key player, subject, context sector, and crowd. And then position is involved times stakeholder we interview, and based on the interview we describe and also doing the activity for the stakeholder interview. And interview, we determine the 5 variable for the interest and 5 variable for the power. And we got the mapping of the stakeholder as it is. This is the area where the stakeholder has a high power and high interest, like forest service at provincial level. They have a high as a key player, but also some international, some NGO like WWF, Mitra Aksi, Kita Buana, and also the KPH, the FMU Hitam. But on the other hand, where the low power and low interest, we surprised that Bapeda at the district level has a crowd position. This is called a crowd position. Probably it is because the different what is called the Bapeda doesn't have much money finance contribution on the peatland restoration in Jambi. This is the explanation. Like for increasing of power and interest, there are some misperception in the understanding of peat restoration. Particularly for the culture, eco-sectoral factor, and overlapping regulation related to peat restoration effort. The unclear socialization, unclear division of trust and responsibility in the field. And we also receive of authority of the result of enactment the law 23. Shifting authority in peatland management in the case of Dam Hitam FPU. Previously, the authority is the BPDAS, but then it shifted to the Dinas Pertanian, Forestry Services of the provincial level. And there is a less coordination among stakeholders in case of Jambi because the budget management from the center, in this case BRG, is carried out directly by regional secretary without the intervention of Bapeda. This might cause Bapeda does not participate much in planning activities and budget. So it seems lack of power in restoration activities. And our farmer group, we also interview some farmer groups. They seem to have a low interest and influence. This might be because the different perception in land restoration, and they also concerned of losing opportunity of to use the land for farming activities. But actually, they some of them already practice and also try to close the ditch in the Dam Hitam FMU. So what the strategy of farmer and community engagement? in the social inclusion, we need to undertake the free informed prior consent principle in the study, and we also need to do the personal approach to the farmers when visiting them to their farm, and we need to maintain the long relation with the local farmer and government institution, like for example research unit and extension unit. There is a clear socialization to improve awareness of farmer on the benefit of agriculture by not draining the peatland and plant the native species. And agriculture has long value chain and cycle, so it needs incentive mechanism. So as the last, there is an economic instrument for facilitating peatland restoration, as mentioned by Wilson et al. A range of economic instrument and policy mechanism can be used to encourage participation in restoration, particularly in formative agriculture, such as positive incentive, including subsidies, grant, tax, or rate concession, payment for environmental service, reduce or remove subsidy for competing land uses. The second, negative incentives such as regulation and tax or tariff. The third, extension technology transfer, education awareness raising and program, and the fourth, technology development through the infrastructure and equipment support and R&D program. So, as a conclusion, the collaboration among all related stakeholders is necessary to bring about sustainable peatland restoration, and the principle of collaborative management should not be sectoral, but must be cross-sectoral. Local communities as the forefront of the restoration activities, having a strong dependency upon the land, should be involved in the action start from the beginning. Then clear information about future benefits, communities will gain the success of restoration need to be socialized widely. A positive development can happen if local people are not motivated and do not see the benefit from restoration. Yes, it is clear, yeah. And a negotiation based on approach that unite various vision and interests must be applied. All parties must realize that particular right exists, and these rights are fundamental part of the course of an activity. The principle of the right-based approach must be followed to promote integrated action in development, restoration, and intervention effort. So that's all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hesti. Thanks also for keeping on time. I think all our speakers have been really great with the time front.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing also your research, very interesting research coming from Jambi, and then looking at social inclusion for peludiculture. We'll definitely check out the publication that has come out for that one. Just for those who have joined us, for our audience, we are keeping our questions to the end. So we've already had Dr. Nuhidaya and also Dr. Hesti, who have presented their work in relation to Central Kalimantan and food security or food estate program, and also peludiculture respectively. So our third speaker for this first session on social and legal perspective is Dr. Yuti Fatima. And Dr. Yuti Fatima is previously working at NTU, but now is actually a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Cambridge. She is working on the Smart Forest project at the Department of Sociology at the University of Cambridge at the moment. She has a PhD in Science and Technology Studies from Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands. Prior to Cambridge, she was a research fellow with us at NTU, and her research was focused on the relationship between ecology and society through the case of Indonesian peatland restoration programs. So without further ado, I will invite Dr. Yuti to share her slides and then to introduce more about what you've done over the last 3 years.
Okay, thank you very much, Janice, for the introduction. So in today's presentation, I'm going to give some of the cases that I work on during my work in NTU. So it's about peatland restoration in Indonesia as a form of transition. So probably as Janice already mentioned, we try to focus on Jambi, but then COVID happened. So before COVID and like sometimes between the COVID period, we managed to conduct field work in Riau. So there's like a shift as well. But from my experience moving from Jambi and also like to Riau, and later on I also went to Kalimantan. It's very interesting for me to see peatland restorations in Indonesia as a form of transition, because from my experience, I'm being exposed that like all the peatland restorations, either in the form of rewetting and also revitalizations, it's been conducted as a form of project. So what happened so as a project, the Indonesian government has like a target like 2 million hectares of peatland, and because of its success, so within the target to restore 2 million hectares, the biggest chunk of the hectares is within the concession, and only around like 900,000 hectares is in the community land, or it's called like social forestry land, and within that area, it's considered as success. And because of that, like the Indonesian government extend the BRG and now add by mangrove restorations to 1.2 million. But the way it's approached is really to have like funding and then like involve community participations. But also if we're talking about community participations, the question is really like, how can they be involved? What type of like power relations is going on? So despite the involvement of community in many peatland restoration activities, the continuity of these activities face many challenges. So Dr. Hesti already mentioned some of the challenges as well. And we also, through the literature review and our experience in the field, we also saw there's like land tenure conflict between the local community and companies. And for these challenges, it's usually happen because in the land they have palm oil plantations, and because it's a palm oil, then it needs to be dried. And it's create like a challenge to the community land, because if we are having like sagu, then it will create like a conflict in terms of like the necessity needed for the species to grow. And there's also like land status regarding social forestry scheme. And in the field also saw there's like a conflict even between the villages. So if we're talking about like community participation, we also need to understand that like community is not homogeneous. There's a conflict even like between like the local elite and the villagers itself. So we cannot really see a project as only like a project, how to protect the project to runs by giving its funding and also like knowledge, but also like how different type of actors can be involved in the project as well. And there's also like a mismatch between designated and actual locations of canal blocking. So I heard story from, so when we did interviews with the policymakers, and there's cases like they already have like a plan and they already point like a specific location, but then when they went to the location, then apparently it's not the peatland locations. So there's also a mismatch like this. And because we're talking about like the system, then the administration processes and also the requirement also create like a challenges for the continuations of peatland restoration project. And there's also like a lack of market for peatland products, as Hesti already mentioned. And there's also like limited funding for peatland restoration project, especially at the village level. So usually what happened in peatland restoration project, it's only been accommodated for 1 year. And then after 1 year, the fundings run out. And even if there's like an evaluation funding, they can only support a certain thing. So for like a new project or like a new initiative, it's very difficult to sustain only for a year. So I'm going to talk about that a bit in the presentation. So peatland restoration as project. So the community participation is one of the like biggest chunks in in peatland restoration project. So this has already been formalized by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry Regulation. This is a quite new regulation, but also so it's basically showing that for the top down, it's through the making the revitalization plan, assessing the plan, legalizing the plan, and from the bottom up is proposal submissions by the community. So the government has restoration funding, and to be able to access it, the community needs to create like a proposal and submit it. But when we went to the field, we also heard people saying like, oh, this is my first time writing a proposal. And it's also create like inclusion, exclusion in terms of only people who can wrote a proposal in a certain way are the one who can get the funding. So it's not really about your expertise and all your experience, but it's also like how to framing like the local conditions into a type of proposal that can be accepted. So there's also this type of like creating like a new elite in terms of like who are the one who can create proposals and writing nicely and doing like a certain type of report, and also like serving people who do the monitoring and evaluations in the field. So this combinations of top-down approach and bottom-up approach create like an in-betweenness where community empowerment through capacity building. So they really try to change the community through capacity building and also like supporting peatland-related product. So creating like a supply chain then that can create like new products that produce through peatland, and also like product diversifications. But again, like the questions, if it's only like 1 year project, what type of like supply chain can be formed in this short time of time. So the objective for this research and for this particular presentation is to understand the combinations of top-down and bottom-up approach in supporting the continuations of peatland restoration. So this is like a small part of one of the project that we did in NTU. So for this research, we did like in-depth interviews with stakeholders in a village in Pekanbaru, Riau, and we did field work in November and March 2020, and we also still keep our communications with the local community through text messages and calls. And there's also like written materials such as reports, news, and papers from the area. So this is the area of study, and this is important to understand that each village have their own histories and also like social technical embeddedness. And in this particular village, they already have like a history of developing sagu since 40 years ago. So the way their interests going on and also like technical skills is really related to sagu activities. And in the context of peatland restoration, this has become important because once a project is being conducted to support the existing interest, then it's become more powerful than just like introducing like a new species to a village who hasn't done anything about that. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you like 3 case studies, and this 3 has like a contrasting embeddedness towards the local interest. So the guiding questions for this presentation is, who are the related actors? Where does the idea of the projects coming from? Because if we're talking about participations, then sometimes it's just like, oh, we have this idea and then you need to follow in a certain way. So the idea of the projects coming from and how the project is being managed, it's very important to understand how the projects can be embedded in the local context. And where does the fund coming from? Because for the peatland restoration, it's interesting to talk about ownership. Sometimes if it's coming, like if the project's coming from the governments, then people will start to think like, oh, this is like a government project. They're the one who's need to fund this. And if it's failed, then it's not our problem because we just involved in the project as basically as a labor to be involved in the project. So this is the first case. It's a rewetting case. So why this rewetting is important for the village and why they support it? It's because it's related to their sagu plantation. So since the 1980s, the local community start to cultivate sagu and benefit from wet peatland. However, in 2008, a company entered the village and the canals crossed multiple villages. And these canals create like a dried peatland, which reduce the productivity of sagu in the village, and it's also led to peat fire in 2014. So when the restoration activity through rewetting entered the village, the local community, especially the sagu farmers, they're happy with that and they support it. Although there's like one problem, so 2 out of like 20 design is they have like a stable canal block, and that's create like barrier for the sagu to transport. So they basically like wait until the project finish, because based on the procedure, they're not allowed to redesign it. But it's also like based on people perceptions. So even according to the regulation, it's like the local community are allowed to kind of like redesign the canals, but then at the village level, they only accepted like, oh, this is like the standard, and then you need to use like certain materials, and you're not allowed to redesign it. But then like they don't want to do anything, because if they do something, then it's been considered as corruption. And corruption is also like a big thing in this like peatland restoration project. There's a lot of like monitoring and evaluations to kind of like secure that the process is not done through corruption. So what they did is like they just like finish everything. Everything is based on the design, but once they already finish everything, they redesign it, and then they basically kind of like create like a canal block opening, so the sagu can pass. And this is the second case. It's a revegetation case. And it's being done by international NGO, local NGO, and landowner. So the context for this case study is an international NGO in 2017 entered the village, and through their partnership with the local NGO, learn about peatland activities and the local life. So this is this first trip was really like a recce trip. They really want to know like what they need and how can they prevent like the haze coming to going outside Indonesia. And the visit was followed by collaborations between the international NGO and the local NGO. So the restoration activity that's been done is by creating like nursery and also like revegetations. But apart from that, based on the interactions with the local community, they kind of like create like a tour. Apart from revegetations, they also create like a vegetable plot, so the villagers can buy some fresh veggies from the plot. And the fundings come from international NGO. And for the third case is revitalization. So during 2014 until 2018, there's a lot of attentions going on because of the peatland fire. So this is a funding from Indonesia Climate Change Trust Fund, and they also got a funding from the UK CCTF as well. So they create a funding opportunity for peatland restoration activities, and for these activities, they create like a catfish pond around like 20 in the village. So the actors that involved in this restoration activities are the research agency, because the research agency submitted a proposal and got funding from the ICCTF and also like the local group. But the catfish projects only last for 2 years, not long after its first harvest. And the reason for its failure was due to difficulty in finding suitable catfish fish, absence of catfish market, and lack of trust in the project management. So when we did like interviews, they asked like, oh, there's only like elite, and there's a lot of like distrust going on among the community. So this is like the socio-ecological context, where you can see that it's very important to have like a strong connection. So as you can see, the catfish ponds has like a weak tie relations with the community. So this is a comparison between the cases. So as you can see, like the continuity for the revitalizations is the least one, is discontinued. And like two others has like a strong embeddedness to the Sagu system. So in conclusions, the success of combinations between top-down and bottom-up approach was strongly influenced by the possibility of adjustment. So for creating like an ownership at the local level, they really need to be able to adjust the project. And at the village level, the adjustments was shaped by the compatibility to the local livelihood. At the national level, it's also creating a questions about the effectiveness of peatland restoration. So if you're doing like a lot of adjustments to the local interest needs, the question is either is the peatland restoration is still effective, and also like trust play a critical role in the continuity of restoration project, and peatland restoration should be seen as part of a transition process as rather than only a project with like disconnections to the local context. Thank you very much. I give it back to Janice.
Thanks very much, Yuti, and thanks very much for the interesting presentation about the work that you have done. I just want to remind the audience that we have pushed all the questions to this part of the session 1, which is on the social and legal perspective for tropical peatland restoration. So we've heard from Dr. Nuhidaya about food estates in Central Kalimantan, from Dr. Hesse about peludi culture and social inclusion in Jambi, and also from Dr. Yuti Fatima relating to a case study approach in Riau, but looking into community participation for peatland restoration. And the floor is open for questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it on the chat group. But if at the moment we're waiting for questions, I could feel some questions that had been posed to the speakers during our audience registration. So there are some very interesting questions that the audience had in relation to, say, law enforcement or implementation of legal use for peatlands. So I'll just field these 2 questions, perhaps to all 3 of the speakers for this session. So the first question relating to how do we ensure that law enforcement on peatlands can be done while facilitating the rights of people who are living in the surrounding peatland area. And the second question about how do we implement the legal use of peatlands with ecological principles with such diverse demographic and also anthropological communities. So these are 2 questions that are posed by the audience members, and I'll just invite perhaps either Dr. Yuti, Dr. Hesse, or Dr. Leili to go and have a go at these 2 questions. So maybe, I don't know, Dr. Leili, would you like to respond first?
Okay, Janice. The first one is about the law enforcement, right?
Yeah, so how to ensure law enforcement on peatland while facilitating the rights of people living in the surrounding peatland area. I think you gave some examples also from Central Kalimantan, but if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, actually, the issue of law enforcement and then no burning method, actually it's create like a human right issue. Like the community feels that with the law enforcement, that the government is enforce the law, whereas the community usually do a slash and burning. And then in the dry session, one of the story I heard from the one, he said that he is like doing like agriculture thing, and then suddenly the police come and then arrest him. So it is a matter like why, like it is for their livelihood, and then why suddenly is the government catch all these small scale farmer, something like that, rather than big companies like oil palm companies. who probably it's difficult if they say they catch they started the fire. So the thing now is with the regulation no burning method, it's the communities in other side. I mean, when they have a FGD, they say it's a violation of human rights, but then for the sake of no haze pollution, so they should follow, and then the government has not provide the sufficiently alternative for no burning method, like opening the land for food estate, for example. They say it's not really sufficient yet, but then in the other side, the local actually adapt, like in 2016. I mean, this regulation is started to adopt in 2015, and then now it's 2020, and they start to adjusting this regulation, and then they start finding other alternative livelihood, which is not really supported by the government, but they actually can manage to have this alternative livelihood without burning. So I think this kind of law enforcement in some other cases, it's good, like it's reduced the burning incident, but then the government still need to support to find alternative livelihood, which is more suitable for the local community. I mean, they need to support this sustainable alternative livelihood for the local, which is without or with government support, actually they can still survive, but I really don't know. Probably if some of the audience here have a different point of view, please. You can
Thanks,
answer.
Yeah, I'm sure that, you know, I mean, if anybody would like to also mention about this, but yeah, I think when you first mentioned about law enforcement and how, with regards to this burning issue, it is also sometimes considered a human rights issue. I think it's a very tricky one. We actually have a question from the audience. To all speakers, this is from Andri Satya. In some situation during peatland restoration, village becomes marginalized area seen from the government terminology and regulation. The area protected, there's area protected area, concession area, concessi dan non-concessi, and villages is put in between, while local people lived there for tens of years before the haze fire happened. So how do we deal with this situation? So I think this is in relation to how perhaps there's this top-down planning in relation to, you know, what land is zoned for protected or concession. But there have been people who have been living there for many years, and then they're placed in a position where a haze or fire situation happens. But there's this historical legacy, perhaps, in terms of land use and land zoning coming from the top down. So how could local communities, I guess, in this context, deal with the situation? Maybe I could field this question to either Dr. Hesti or Dr. Yuti.
Hello.
Yes, Dr. Hesti.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yeah, I will try to give my opinion on the question from Andri Satya. Yeah, I think it's after reading your question, I think this is a relation with the first question in the audience registration. In some situation during the peatland restoration, it become a marginalized area. So first, I would like to answer the first question in the registration first. So then it will relate with the question of Pak Andri Satya. So in my opinion, if because the audience asks about a among social, and ecological issue, which issue should be given the most intention, and how such issue will be addressed. And in my opinion, it depends on the local context. I mean, like for example, in where peatland close with local community, and then social aspects should be given most attention. But then, if the peatland restoration is in the concession area, which is usually far from the community, the community live, and then the ecological issue and legal issue should be given the most intention. And like for example, if we see the Sebangau National Park, because this audience also asks how long the restoration will take place, and it will take a very long time. Yeah, like for example in Sebangau National Park, the restoration already started since 1995, if I'm not mistaken. It's already take more than 2 decades, and it is still going on. So Ibu Yuti right that the peatland restoration cannot be conducted in project base, but it should be as continuous activities, and it is a long-term activities of restoration. So in continuation with the question from Pak Andri Satya, so I think where the local people already live in the peatland area, and we in the area is probably in the past there is no fire occur because of the still doing another farming activities out of the peatland area, like what I understand in Dayak people, they in the past they don't like to do farming in peatland area, but they prefer to do in the dry land. So now where the land is limited, they also the local people and also the migrant people, they also doing farming in peatland. So it's the fire come frequently after the farming practices on peatland. So and your question is about how to deal with this situation. I think first is of course the awareness of community is to be increased, should be improved, and not only awareness but also the government with support with the government, the local community should give community development and also community capacity building on how to manage the peatland sustainably, and also give access to market for the product coming from peatland restoration. I think if the farmer and the local community get the benefit from the restoration effort, then they will collaborate and also participate with the high what's called high awareness, and also happily will involve in the restoration. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Hesti, for the comprehensive answer. Dr. Yu, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think like for me, I can only add one of the type of local wisdom to manage sustainable peatland area is based on the local livelihood. So like sagu is good. Pineapple, they don't need drainage, but then they need like a certain drain. So So they don't go against peatland, but they need a certain dryness for the soil. So that can also work. And somehow it's being promoted as part of the some old polyculture as well. So that can be considered as local wisdom. And for Andri Satya, I also have like a big sympathy for the local community. So in my case, the way they go against like concession is through like guerrilla. So I don't know. I mean, like whether you can consider this as the just way of doing things, but in the village that I'm working on, they enter the concession area, and then they plant sagu in the area, and then by doing that they can claim that, oh, this is already like our land and we already use this land for many decades, and that's create like a justification for them to own. So in this particular village, what happened was initially it was concession. So in 2000, the government through the Ministry of Forestry give the concessions to a company, and then through this guerrilla and also a campaign, and because in the area there's a fire, then they managed to kind of like so concession being canceled, and now it's under like social forestry scheme. So that one also work, but I don't think we can generalize like this idea, because in other island it's still ongoing conflicts between the concessions and the local community. So this is just like the fact. I don't know like what's the best way to doing about this. Yeah, so probably that's only like the addition for me, because we're running out of time as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Yuti. Yeah, I think like what you mentioned, these are acts of resistance from the communities that try to, I think, claim a stake on their land, and also to try to be able to respond to these pressures that are coming from the top down, that are probably out of their control as well. But within their control, I think these are things that they do, but it doesn't always work in every case, right? I think that it's very context specific from one location to another. We have some very interesting questions, but unfortunately, I think we would have to stop here. And I just want to thank my three speakers for this session one on social and legal perspective on tropical peatland restoration, Dr. Lely, Dr. Hesty, and also Dr. Yuti. So three very brilliant female scientists who have shared their experiences working in the field on tropical peatlands, and also sharing their expertise and also their research findings for each of these case studies. We will be having a second session, which will actually be moderated by Dr. Yuti. And this second session is about the biophysical and also the ecological perspective on tropical peatland restoration. So perhaps I will pass the time now and hand it over to Dr. Yuti. So I just want to thank again Dr. Lely, Hesty, and also Yuti. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janice.
Thank you, everyone. So now we're going to continue to the second session. We have four incredible speakers with us, and I'm going to introduce the first two speakers. So Wang Nai is a postdoc in Asian School of Environment, NTU. He obtained his PhD and did his first postdoc in NUS, where he worked on pitcher plants and swamp forest trees. His postdoc in NTU was based on the project he will now be sharing on, which he worked on together with two other speakers in the session, Estia and Stuart. Wang Nai research revolves around bottom-up ecological processes, such as effect of traits on ecosystem processes. He will present together with Estia. Estia is a research associate in Earth Observatory Science of Nanyang Technological University. She obtained master's degree in life sciences from the National Institute of Education, NTU. Her research expertise spans from biological sciences, ecophysiology, and botany. Her current research examines peatland restorations and exploring flammability traits of tropical swamp species with Wang Nai and Stuart. So without further ado, time and place is yours, Wang Nai and Estia.
Thanks, Yuti. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me quickly share my screen here. Yeah, today I'll be talking about a project that is, I think, a bit more ecological in nature compared to the other presentations which have been given so far. But I hope that by the end of the presentation, you'll be able to see that these fundamental questions are still important to apply reforestation practices. This project, I must mention, was led mainly by Estia and Stuart, but I'm the main presenter today. But Estia would still be assisting during the Q&A session, especially for those questions which are more related to her expertise. So let's dive right in. Just a quick introduction. Decomposition and fire are two of the major carbon release pathways that are coupled in many ecosystems worldwide. And what do I mean by coupled? For example, at the ecosystem level, slower decomposition rates can lead to higher buildup of stored carbon, which may burn more readily. So in other words, systems which have slower decomposition rates have higher flammability rates, and the opposite will also be true. In other words, flammability and decomposability are negatively coupled in such systems. Of course, reality is far more complex than this, and such a coupling should not be assumed for all systems globally. And so what we were interested in studying in this study are how functional traits may be predictors of decomposability or flammability. And functional traits are species kind of characteristics which are sort of stable within species. For example, we might say that species A has leaves that are quite thick, around 2 millimeters thick, and they contain on average this amount of nitrogen or phosphorus. These can be called functional traits, and they are useful for describing species and maybe useful for predicting ecological processes, such as the flammability or decomposability of whole communities of trees. So in this study, we wanted to ask if flammability and decomposability in peat swamp forest tree species are predictable, can be predicted by certain traits, and also if they were coupled. We looked at soft traits as well as biochemical traits, which I will talk a little bit more on later on in the presentation. How did we do this? So as we have mentioned earlier in this presentation, unfortunately, some of our earlier plans of working in Indonesia did not materialize because of COVID travel restrictions at that time. So we ended up doing this study in the Nisun Swamp Forest in Singapore. This is a small freshwater swamp forest that is one of our last remaining places that are not really affected so much by anthropogenic activities. Do you have a bunch of plots here? But we collected mainly from 10 plots, which are either in non-swamp areas, so the light brown ones, or in swamp areas, which are the darker brown plots here, 10 plots. From these plots, we identified 22 focal tree species, which produce quite a significant amount of leaf litter. 11 of these species, so about half of them, are well known to be associated with peat swamp forests in the region. For example, this one here on the shown here, Hosphilia crassifolia, which is quite a well-known peat swamp tree species across, I think, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. And we also collected the functional traits of these species according to known protocols. We especially focused on biogeochemical traits, for example, element concentrations, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, manganese, iron, silicon, aluminum, and also soft traits, which are commonly measured traits that are used as proxies of certain strategies, plant strategies. We did decomposition experiments in the field, so we put leaves in decomposition bags, litter bags, and placed them in the field for 1 year. We use different types of leaf litter bags, which are accessible to larger invertebrates versus only accessible to microbes. And we placed them on hollows, which are these areas, the wetter areas in peat swamps, these are sort of sunken areas we call hollows, and these drier areas which are called hummocks. And this comparison is important because it allows us to also evaluate the effect of peat swamp drainage on decomposition process. And for flammability, we used a series of experiments using this apparatus, which is called the epiradiator. Let me just show you some of the measures we took. So we measured things like ignition speed, the amount of time that's taken for certain things to happen, ignition temperature, using that probe to measure the temperature, combustibility, and measuring the amount of heat release, and the duration that the fire would burn for. So these are different flammability components, we call them components. But let me just show you in a video what this looks like. So looks like this. We place a small leaf there. You can see smoke starting to release. This is called smoldering. And you see this is called pyrolysis. And when the smoke ceases, we measure the time taken to smolder. And when pyrolysis ends, which is about now, sorry, now, yes, yeah, we measure the amount of time that is taken. So these are some of the parameters that we measured in our experiments, including, in addition to some of the others that I showed you on the previous page. So I'm going to be talking about analysis and results together. We have two main parts to this study, the decomposability and the flammability part. And then after that, whether the two were coupled. So on the decomposition side, or decomposability, some of the immediate findings that we had were that litter decomposes faster when exposed on hummocks. In other words, when litter is buried in the sort of anoxic substrates of flooded swamps, they decompose significantly slower, and when they're exposed on the surface of well-draining substrates, they decompose much faster. This is relatively well known. There have been some studies which have shown otherwise, but generally our study confirms this, and it gives a good estimate of the amount of contribution of waterlogging to the slowing down of decomposition. And also meso and macrofauna, in other words, invertebrates like isopods, like mites, like shrimps in the aquatic environment. These will definitely increase decomposition rates, but this happens more so in hollows, in other words, more so by aquatic invertebrates than by terrestrial ones on the hummocks. I'll elaborate a little bit on that later on, but we also went on to look at decomposability. In other words, if you look at this diagram, each of these species differ in their intrinsic rate of decomposition in a very systematic way. Regardless of the condition, they differ in a very systematic way in their decomposability. So we modeled this decomposability and looked at how the plant traits affect this decomposability. And what we found was that in the best models, we found that thicker leaves with a lower surface area to volume ratio and a higher SLA, these thicker leaves actually decomposed faster. So thicker leaves decompose faster, as you can see from this graph over here. This is slightly counterintuitive, but I think the most obvious or most likely explanation for this is that the air spaces which are found in many of these thicker leaves, air spaces formed by, for example, these spongy mesophyll layers, these air spaces may actually provide microbes with a little bit of oxygen, oxygen for decomposition to happen. Now, we also know from the literature that one of the key enzymes responsible for decomposition is this enzyme known as phenol oxidase, which is very much affected by oxygen availability. So what this finding suggests is that oxygen availability, or which is revealed in the physical characters of leaves, may be one of the primary driving forces behind decomposition rate in some forest tree species. So that's our first findings for decomposability. How about flammability? So for flammability, we modeled flammability, 4 different components of flammability, and we modeled them in the same way we modeled the decomposability. We have the 4 components over here: combustibility, ignition temperature, ignition speed, and fire sustainability. And this is the summary of what are the traits that we found best predict each of these components of flammability. Strangely, for combustibility, so for example, the amount of heat that is produced in burning the leaves, none of the traits that we measured were really good predictors of combustibility. So we will ignore this for now. But what we found for ignition, if you look over here, calcium was actually a very good predictor for fresh leaf ignition temperature. Manganese and the nitrogen to phosphorus ratio was a very good predictor for fresh leaf ignition speed. Iron and even potassium, as well as some other traits, were very good predictors for ignition speed in senesced leaves, in other words, leaves that dried and are shed by the plant naturally. But as for fire sustainability, it was different. SLA, which is a measure of like how soft and how floppy a leaf is. SLA meaning like the amount of tissue per area of leaf, was the best predictor for the fire sustainability. In other words, how long a leaf could continue burning for both fresh and senesced leaves. So the first thing we see is essentially this, that biochemical traits have very good predictive power for ignitability of leaves, whereas soft traits like SLA is the best predictor for sustainability of leaves. So these findings are essentially summarized in this graph. This graph shows the traits that we have on the as rows. These are different traits, soft traits, and these are different biochemical traits. And in the columns, we have the different responses. So the decomposability in blue, combustibility in yellow, ignitability, ignition speed in light orange, ignition temperature in dark orange, and sustainability in red. And the filled triangles indicate that there is a positive correlation between nitrogen phosphorus ratio and ignition speed for senesced leaves, and so on. Okay, so I know this graph is a lot of information, but I'm just going to summarize it very quickly. The first key finding we have is that biochemical traits, look at all these filled triangles, or all these filled triangles say that biochemical traits actually have very good prediction capability for ignitability of leaves. And these are some of the predictions, which I would not elaborate on. Okay, some of the predictions, again, very strong correlations. And the second finding is that these SLA, so soft traits, which are measured, shown over here, are very good predictors of decomposability and sustainability, which are shown here. See, very strong relationship over here. Okay, we would think from this diagram here that, oh, decomposability should therefore be coupled with sustainability. However, what we found was that there was no coupling between decomposability on the y-axis and any of the flammability components that we measured in all of the leaves shown over here. So this was an interesting finding, but it's also quite important for the implications of this study. So for discussion, I just want to highlight the some of the main points which we found from here, which is that decomposition in tropical swamps is oxygen limited. This is something I mentioned slightly just now. In dryland habitats from the literature, we find that many of the nutrient traits would be strong predictors of decomposability. But in this study on swamps, instead we find that it is physical traits of the leaves which predict decomposability. And we also find that invertebrates in swamps, actually these aquatic invertebrates possibly, and other small aquatic invertebrates increase decomposition rate greatly in the submerged aquatic environment. In other words, there is a very important role of aquatic fauna in this ecosystem process. Secondly, we also find that despite this superficial correlation, decomposability and fire sustainability were not coupled. Okay, now the implications of this are a little bit more ecological, so I will skip over this, but the key thing that we must note here is that these soft traits are not really good predictors of the exact underlying mechanism driving some of these ecological processes. Now, this is quite important. The last important finding I want to point out is that biochemical traits are very good predictors of ignitability. And this is unfortunate. I wouldn't say unfortunate, but unfortunately, biochemical traits are not very well studied, and therefore our finding shows that biochemical traits definitely require a lot more attention for future studies in predicting flammability. So in conclusion, just the takeaway message for reforestation: if decomposability and flammability were coupled, there would be certain ways in which we need to select reforestation species. But because they are not coupled, this is our finding, the key finding in this study, we know that it is possible to select species for reforestation that both have low decomposability as well as low flammability. In other words, species that will accumulate carbon in the system quickly because their leaves don't decompose so fast, they form peat, and their leaves don't burn so well, so they are not so susceptible to burning again. And we also find that our study points towards the need for further research on biochemical leaf traits as predictors of flammability, particularly ignitability. Thank you so much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wang Nai and Estia. So it's very interesting to see, like for the first session, we're focusing on like macro system, and now we're really going deep into the leaves and the ecosystem. So from leaves, now we're moving to water system. So I'm going to introduce the next speaker is Agus Yassin. He's the head of the working group on the restoration technique of peatland and mangrove restoration agency. He obtained a master's degree in geoinformation for spatial planning for Gajah Mada University and ITC, and bachelor degree in forest management from Gajah Mada University. His expertise in conservation range from natural conservation resources to peatland ecosystem management. So without further ado, I give the floor to Pak Agus Yassin.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I would like to share my materials. Okay, thank you. This is my material about tropical peatland restoration in Indonesia. So we have three main parts for this opportunity. First is about actual condition of peatland in Indonesia. The second is about peatland restorations, and the last is about rewetting. So this is a peatland. Peatland is an organic material, of course. It is not completely decomposed and accumulates in swamp. And the distribution in Indonesia, there is 13.9 million hectares. And Indonesia is the fourth largest peatland after Russia, Canada, and the United States. But in the tropical area, Indonesia is the largest. Peatland also, it stores 30% more carbon than forest biomass. It has a function for water supply and ecosystem services. So because of its large number, it's around 14 million hectare. Our peatland is already used for cultivation. There is rubber plantation, oil palm, commercial logging, industrial forest, and agriculture also. And for these conversions, there are massive drainage system. In our study in 2019, it is around 240 million kilometers of drainage system, which is equivalent with 6 times of Earth length. And this massive drainage system, it can cause forest fire, greenhouse gas emissions, land subsidence, and also biodiversity loss. So because of its problem, we government of Indonesia managed to restore our peatland. By presidential decree in 2020, government of Indonesia established Peatland and Mangrove Restoration Agency. It has adaptive acceleration of peatland restoration and also improve community welfare and to accelerating mangrove rehabilitation. So this is our work area. For peatland restoration, we work on 7 provinces in Riau, Jambi, South Sumatra, West Kalimantan, Central Kalimantan, South Kalimantan, and Papua. We have a target until 2024. We have to restore 1.2 million hectares of peatland and 600,000 hectares of mangrove. To rehabilitate the peatland, we have 2 approaches. First is quick response approach, means that we overcome the problem in the short term immediately. And the second is systematic comprehensive approach, which means that to restore the peatland needs collaborative action with any stakeholder relates. And we have a strategy, we develop 3R strategy. There is rewetting by build canal blocking, canal backfilling, and deep wells, revegetations to rehabilitate degraded peatland by the fire, and revitalization of local livelihood. To ensure its sustainability, we also took operation and maintenance for intervention for all interventions. And besides physical intervention, we also made social intervention by the MPG. The MPG is Sustaining Stewardship Peat Village. This is our target for peatland restoration. The largest target is in Riau province. It is more than 600,000 hectares. The second largest is in Central Kalimantan, around more than 500,000 hectares. And the lowest is in South Kalimantan, is just around 70,000 hectares. So by total in 2024, we hope that we can rehabilitate around 1.2 million hectares. In the last years, in 2021, we already built deep wells around 110 units, canal blocking 776 units, revegetation in 590 hectares, and revitalization is about 281 package. So this is the spread of all restoration activity. And this is to enrich our knowledge in restoring peatlands. In the picture left, upper left, it is the peatland with fire. And we can see in the picture upper right, after we build canal blocking, the water level is increased and it accelerates natural regenerations. And in the picture below, there is evidence that our physical infrastructure is not enough. Even though the pit is already wet by canal blocking, but if there is a fire, it still can burn the pit. Fortunately, with weather condition, the fire just occur in upper part of the peatland, and it's easy to manage. The thing is, physical intervention with some infrastructure might not finish our work in peatland restoration. It needs social intervention also, such as raising awareness, educate people, empowering local people, and strengthening institutional in our community. So to do that, we have Sustaining Stewardship Peat Village, or the MPG, which is we develop the MPG in a village by some activities such as peatland restoration, placing village facilitator, participatory mapping, strengthening local institution, training for local people, like field school or sekolah lapang, and training on agriculture without burning, PLTB. Integration our agenda into village plans. So our restoration could be planned by the village, and it is also village budgets to restore our peatland, and also involve local community to monitor the peatland. And it is focused on rewetting. This is an example of peatland hydrological units in West Kalimantan. We build canal blocking to maintain water from its dome. So all drainage system we intervene with canal blocking, so we can hold the water in the peatland. If we look this 3D model, actually in every peatland there is domes and drainage system that contribute to drain peatland. We put this canal blocking in this place, so it become wet and we can prevent the water from its dome. So this is what our intervention canal blocking in all drainage system. And to restore peatland is not a single year, so it needs a multi year. So we made it part by part. This is the type of canal blocking, some kinds of canal blocking which is already built by PRGM. There is wood canal blocking, precast hollow, concrete canvas canal blocking, and etc. In every year, we try to find innovation for material or shapes of the canal blocking. We still continue to search any possible material that is more economic and more reliable in the pit, making peatland wet not only by canal blocking, because it just prevents the water from the drainage system. In tropical regions like Indonesia, normally in a dry season, evaporation can reach 6 millimeters per day. So it means that if there is no rainfall in a month or in the 3 months, the water will lose until 60 centimeters. Since we have a threshold, 0.4 meter water level to maintain, so there must another options to fill the water in the peatland. We operate deep wells, there is thousands of deep wells we have built, and we operate when the peatland is prone to fire or when there is a fire occurrence. And in the extreme cases, we also collaborate with National Research and Innovation Agency or BRINS to make climate modification technology or artificial rains by pouring a ton of salt into the sky. This is what we do in rewetting. And also one important thing is in rewetting is to ensure our infrastructure working well. So we collaborate with local community to operate, maintain, and repair infrastructure. So this is an example how local community repair the canal blocking. It takes just 1 day to finish repairing. So it is just an example how local community made this. And to compete all, we established also peatland wetting organization from headquarters to site task force in village level. We analyze some indicators such as hotspots and also weather forecast, water level, and fire incidents. And in the site task force consists of many stakeholders such as BRGM team, fire care community, community group, maintenance officer, village assistant, and village facilitator. It is a response unit, so it also completes with contact number. So if we have indication of prone area, especially related to wire, we can manage to have a quick response. And since water is the key issue in the peatland ecosystem, so we put water level monitoring tools, water level monitoring devices across 7 priority restoration province. This is the spreads of these devices. It can be used as an early warning system also, and describe about our activities so far. It continuously sends a real-time data about the water level in the peatland. So it is real-time data from the devices. And for the public, we also develop an online web GIS platform that provide latest restoration progress in 7 provinces. So you can visit on our website in www.prims.brgm.go.id. You can find our peatland restoration activities, our peatland condition, hotspot, drainage system, water level monitoring, and also we develop fire danger rating system. It is collaborate with BRIN, with Indonesian Meteorological Agency, and also Bogor Agriculture Institute. It's forecast for 7 days ahead about the prone area in our peatland. So for the conclusions, peatland naturally wet. To utilize the peat, there is drainage system, and it become problem in our peat ecosystem. Peatland restoration aims to maintain the water from its dam. Wetting by bill canal blocking can hold water longer during dry seasons. Build physical infrastructure for peatland restoration is not enough. Social intervention is also needed through raising awareness, educate people, and capacity building. The role of the parties, and especially the local community, is very much needed in maintaining the restoration activities that have been built. That's all from me. Thank you for the opportunity to explain about our peatland restoration in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Agus Yasin. You managed to present like this comprehensive work in 15 minutes. So thank you very much. And it's very interesting to see like the different angle that the Indonesian government's already done for peatland restorations in Indonesia. So now we continue to our third speaker, to Stuart. So Stuart is a lecturer in ecology and conservation at the University of Brighton. Formerly a postdoctoral researchers working with Janice in the School of Environment, Nanyang Technological University. Stuart is still actively involved in ecological research in peat swamp restoration, particularly taking on plant soil perspective. So without further ado, Stuart, the time is yours.
I'm just going to share my screen. Is that okay, Yuti? Can you see?
Perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Yeah, hello everyone, and thank you for staying on for the last session of this workshop. So yeah, my name's Stuart. I used to work at Nanyang Technological University, and now I'm at University of Brighton. And for this talk, I'm going to be going through a publication that we recently went to press this year, as well as some other related studies to do with peat swamp forest reforestation. So the restoring the vegetative layer of peat swamp forests. And this is definitely a collaborative work. And whilst at NTU, I work very closely with Estia, who's also on the call, as well as Yuti, Janice, and others. So where does this project stem from? If I go to the next slide. So the project in Singapore, we started in 2019 and 2020, going to different restoration project sites across Indonesia and talking to project managers and those involved in these projects. And what we found when we were in discussion with these different projects is they were using similar species, but recommending them very differently. So one project would recommend one species that was very good and survived very well in their restoration site, and another group would recommend a completely different species. And then we went to the literature to see this. We also found very different results in terms of the success rate and survival and performance of the different peat swamp forest species being planted. And at the time, there wasn't really any kind of systematic comparison of that monitoring data that existed. There had been reports and literature reviews that recommended certain species, but none that had kind of gone through the data that people use to monitor reforestation projects. So this is kind of what stemmed the project, to kind of look into that monitoring data and see whether we could kind of synthesize it to come up with a picture of species performance. So at the start of our project, we kind of came up with a kind of a very rough and broad flow of how a reforestation project works on a peat swamp forest, and this is probably general to a lot of restoration projects, in terms of first selecting the species, and then a lot of the practitioners said they tried to match the species with the site conditions, so whether they're flood tolerant or flood intolerant, or whether they needed to be near, whether they would survive near a blocked canal or away from a blocked canal, and also to take into account the microtopography or competing against weeds or ferns or sedges. And then if we wanted to increase the survival of those species, there'll be site interventions. So a very common one in peat swamp forests is, for example, mounding to get above the flood level when the peat floods, and then there's monitoring. So you have this flow of a design of a reforestation project, and the monitoring then feeds back into trial and error, and that's what's reported in theses and publications and technical reports and expert word of mouth. And that's all that information there at the bottom here is what we wanted to kind of synthesize in a systematic review. So for our review, our main question of interest, which was which peat swamp forest species survive and grow best when planted in a degraded tropical peatland across Southeast Asia. So we were kind of very interested in comparing all the species that are being used in reforestation and which ones were doing best. Obviously, we wanted to try and qualify that. So which seedling and site treatments and site conditions, if we could integrate them, were influencing the species survival and growth. And the other thing we want to look at is these plant functional traits. So Weng Nai in the first presentation of this session was talking about plant functional traits predicting flammability, but we wanted to use those same or similar functional traits that we could get from the literature to predict survival and growth of trees in tropical peat swamp reforestation. We weren't actually using flammability traits for this, because that's kind of a novel project on itself, but other traits. So a systematic review is quite a laborious task, so it shouldn't be undertaken too lightly, and that's the probably experience of our team. So whereas a literature review you can probably do in 2 to 3 weeks or a few months, a systematic review usually takes more than 9 months and up to 2 years. So this is the framework. So there's lots of protocols online for following a systematic review, and we followed the environmental evidence guidelines for following the protocol of a systematic review. So you spend time scoping and formulating your research question, you develop the criteria for that, and then a lot of the time is searching for literature and searching for studies relevant to your question, and then screening them and then coming up with eligibility before you even get to the analysis. So actually the process from probably 1 to 5 takes the most time, and the analysis and the writing up is the easy bit at the end. So in terms of what we were doing for trying to find information to inform this study, we realized very quickly that your traditional kind of Google Scholar or internet search bases weren't providing us with very much information. And this is because a lot of information on reforestation is in the grey literature. It's in theses, it's in unpublished reports, it's in conference proceedings. It doesn't get published in international journals. So a lot of it's kind of an unpublished form. So we spent a lot of time trying to find that grey literature. So we searched for national and society journals, repositories, forest departments, conference proceedings. We have about 3 decades of conference proceedings that we worked through. We also looked at multiple languages. So that's very important, especially in the context of Southeast Asia. So we looked for publications in English, Indonesian, and Malay, and also included articles in Japanese and German if there was an abstract in English or Indonesian. So our review is actually a mixture of English and mainly English and Indonesian articles with a few other languages. So then we screened the articles for eligibility. So we wanted to make them, they were monitoring reforestation in tropical peat swamp forests, planting native trees. So we had the requirement that that project was at least planting 1 native trees, but we included non-natives if they were planting at least 1. And we had about 605 articles that we came with at the end of that initial screening process before we really went into eligibility and data quality. And once we went into eligibility and data quality, we come down to about 94 study sites. I call them study sites because some publications might be on the same site, but have published in a journal, on a conference proceeding, in a thesis, in a report. So we kind of condensed them into one study site, whilst others actually got split. So sometimes there might be one publication that actually had 2 separate experiments in 2 different locations that were in different years, and we actually separated those, for example. But in total, we had 94 study sites that went into the literature review, and these were all across Southeast Asia. So there was Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Brunei, and it also included 15 completely unpublished data sets as well. We actually contacted about 43 authors to ask for data. So data was often not available, and we wanted to have the data available to process. So that data came in lots of different forms. So some was summaries of the species performance, so survival of a species at a particular site, whereas others was individual data of individual seedlings. And we had to kind of get all of that data to kind of be at the same standard and the same resolution. So our data points in our analysis, we have a study site. So if it was a particular study site, a species and a treatment, and then we average from them. So even if we had individual seedling data, we've averaged that to the species and the seedling and site treatment. And we came up with 3 metrics for our analysis. We have survival, which we weighted by the number of seedlings. So this works that if you have a very big reforestation site of 50,000 seedlings and you have a survival data for that, that's more reliable than a trial that has just 50 individuals for that site. So the weighting gave more weight to the findings of bigger studies. We also have half-life, which is kind of the survival in terms of months until 50% of that group of species or a site treatment were dead. So it's a measure of time until 50% survival. And we also investigated standardized relative growth rates, which we did by line fitting. And just to show what that data looks like across all the study sites and species. So here in this middle column, we have a list of species. So we have about 141 species in the review that we found and validated. And the panel to the right shows the variation in species across those studies. You can see there was huge variation. So that kind of fitted with our provisional findings when we were doing these site visits about how variable the species performances were. The mean survival across all of the species in our review was about 62%. Across variable durations, and a median of about 70%. And here on the left is the occurrence of those species across study sites. And I'll come back to that in a minute, but you can just see here actually that we have 2 very commonly planted species. And most of our studies, a large number of our studies were in Indonesia, particularly central Kalimantan. But Shorea balandrin is the most commonly planted species, followed by Dryia polyphylla. So these really dominate the reforestation literature. I'll go to the next slide. But yeah, we have 141 species that we found in the review, but this is obviously a massive underutilization of swamp forest tree species. So estimates for the tree and palm-like tree diversity of peat swamp forest is in the region of 1,173 species. So obviously our review is not everything that's been done, but it's quite a good snapshot, and it's about 1/10 of what the actual diversity is. So we're replanting far less species to replace peat swamp forests. And often in a planting study, so this graph at the bottom here shows the number of species per study, and we often have one species per study. I think the average was around 3 to 4 species per study. So we're not planting many species per study when reforesting peat swamp forests. And as I said before, we have this dominance of two species that are being planted in most studies and trials. In terms of treatments, we did explore this, but it was quite challenging. So that this is for future research, it would be useful to have more studies that have experimental designs that have treatments and controls. So we actually found that a lot of treatment studies didn't have a control to compare to. They just went for the treatment. And this is quite surprising, actually, because, for example, like mounding is a very expensive treatment to do on a large scale without any evidence that it's really significantly working. So this needs to be done more. So there needs to be more studies where we actually use treatments versus controls. One of the studies that was quite successful was at the nursery stage, then going into the field of inoculating species with mycorrhiza. So we found that increased the survival of species, but not necessarily the half-life or the RGR. So that kind of merited a bit further research, we think. And some other interesting findings was that when you're outplanting or planting in the field in peat swamp forest, shading actually had a negative effect on survival, half-life, and RGR. So that was quite interesting, that a lot of these peat swamp forest species aren't benefiting from artificial shading being used out in the field. And fertilization, which is obviously used quite a lot to kickstart the growth of a lot of these peat swamp forest species, actually increased growth, but reduced growth, but increased survival, which was quite interesting. And actually we actually discussed in the paper that we should probably be looking at mycorrhiza rather than fertilization, if mycorrhiza has this positive effect on survival without having these input based of fertilization. So that definitely needs more exploration. Another surprising finding from the review is that actually rewetting initially had a negative effect on seedling survival as a whole. The data that we had in this review has actually gone into a much wider review of the whole of Southeast Asia on mineral soils and peat swamp forests. The published elements of our data set went into that data set. And this is work by Lindsay Bain, or led by Lindsay Bain et al. And it's currently in press in philosophical transactions of biological sciences. But in their analysis, they separated their survival into bin classes. So they had survival at year 1, 2, 5, 5 to 10, etc. And when comparing it to mineral soils, it was quite interesting. So yes, the mortality rate was higher for peat swamp forests initially in year 1, but actually when you get to years 5 and 10, it reverses, and the mortality rate is higher in mineral soils compared to peat swamp forests. But the more astute of you will probably see that there's not much data here, so that's a huge caveat. But it could be the case that initially survival is lower in peat swamp forests and wet conditions, but once they've established or once they've survived, then those species will survive. Another major, and then another element of that is that mounding we found did enhance survival. So that is a way to get around rewetting, but it was very weak and only increased survival. But we also, in our review, we came across some very interesting studies that are using the microtopography of the peat. So if it hasn't been lost, these studies were quite positive in trying to match the species tolerance to flooding with the microtopography, so planting on hummocks. And then, yes, we only found one study that had actually monitored planted seedlings. There had been a fire and they continued to monitor. That was work by Maya Lampala, and then she actually monitored the surviving species after a fire. And that's data we really need, because we actually know that a lot of species can survive fire. They might resprout following fires. And what is that selective pressure of the surviving trees, and how can we ensure those trees survive after a fire? And that kind of feeds into the work that Weng Nai was talking about with flammability traits. And then one of the last major findings from our studies was this relationship between growth rate and mortality rates, or half-life. So we found that actually slower growing species lasted for longer across our studies. So these are all the species here, the averages for the different species. And on the bottom axis here is relative growth rate, and this is half-life, and we find this kind of negative relationship. So the slower growing species lasted for longer in peat swamp forests, which was an interesting finding, and it's kind of the first demonstration of this growth mortality trade-off for peat swamp forests. So on average, half-life is around 33 months, but obviously slower growing species, they can last for longer. And our last aim was to kind of explore this plant functional trait element. And some plant functional traits did predict survival, but not so much half-life and RGR. And a major downfall for the plant functional trait element for our review is that they're not actually used very much in restoration. So we actually got a lot of our plant functional traits from studies going into intact peat swamp forests, which have very different environmental conditions that will influence the expression of those plant functional traits. So more functional traits could be collected from the restoration sites themselves or as the seedling progresses. But for the functional traits that we did measure, survival, lower leaf magnesium and low wood density positively affected survival, whereas higher leaf potassium negatively. And actually magnesium, for example, is connected to these nutrient deprived conditions in peat swamp forests, and it might be related to the tolerance of those species to those nutrient deprivation. And the wood density one is quite interesting because in a lot of mineral soils, it's the opposite, that higher wood density increases survival. But in peat swamp forests, it could be related to the tolerance of flooding and the density of the wood related to flooding tolerance that enables them to survive. So what are we up to at the moment, and what are we doing next? So we've currently been working with other projects to monitor seedling survival data. And this is an example of that. So we've been working with, for example, Borneo Nature Foundation. So they have a very big data set, which they partly contributed to the systematic review, but they had another data set of around 9,000 seedlings in a nursery that they wanted to understand how survival changed as you went from the nursery into outplanting. And that's been quite an interesting project. So from this graph on the right, you can see—
Can you summarize it in one sentence?
Yeah, I've got one more slide after this, and that's it. So this is cumulative survival. So it's around 25% when you go from the nursery to the outplanting. So about 1/5 of seedlings survive. And then, yeah, we're seeking collaborations to put the review into practice. So I think my time is up, and I am on my last slide, you see, sorry. So yeah, this is, the work has been published. It's been a huge collaborative effort. So this is in Journal of Applied Ecology. The manuscript is also in the supporting information in all the manuscript in Indonesian as well. So if you go to the web link here, and there's various outreach as well to do with the work. So yeah, thank you. And the only one to go over time slightly, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. So it's really show like how complicated research are. It needs like a lot of collaborations to make this type of work, but it's also representing peatland restoration in anywhere. Basically, we need a lot of collaborations. We need like knowledge from different sectors as well. I invite people from the audience to give questions, and you can give questions either in Bahasa or in English. I will translate it. And if it's not, I will read some questions that we already have on hand, and I will just like give each speaker like one time to respond to the questions, because we are already kind of like running out of time. So is there any questions from the audience? You can also just like turn on your speaker and then like talk to us like directly. Otherwise, I will just read the questions that we already have in hand. Okay, so we have like some general questions, and I think this works for all of us. So one of the question is, how can we implement the effective restoration? And also like the second one is, what is the current state of peatland restoration in Indonesia? Or And then like, do you think Indonesia degraded peatland is at an alarming rate, and is it possible to be restored? I think like each of the speaker can respond to these questions, and then like summing the discussions for this session. Thank you. So probably like Wang Nai first, and then hand it over to Pak Agus and then Stuart.
I'm not sure if I can provide a satisfactory answer, but I think let me just say something very quickly about G2, the second question. How can we implement effective restoration? I cannot give an answer to that, but I can say for sure that the effectiveness can be improved by considering functional traits and life history strategies of trees. I think that what Stuart just presented just now and stuff which we went through also in my presentation definitely shows that functional traits screening can improve the effectiveness of some of these restoration efforts, because certain species are just more likely to survive, certain species are just less likely to burn, and also I'm sure in many other areas that we have not yet explored, functional traits can provide a little bit of at least increasing the probability of success in the field. That's all I can say. Thanks.
Thank you. Pak Agus Yasin, do you want to respond to the question?
Okay, thank you. Maybe first I want to comment about the current status of peatland restoration in Indonesia. Actually, until 2021, we have finished peat restoration intervention in area around 1.1 million hectare. And by 2024, we are targeting to approach 1.2 million hectare. And if you want to know about which part of area which is have intervened and which is our next targets, you can see in our website in prims.brgm.co.id. And about in our opinion about how the Indonesian peatland being degraded, actually the Ministry of Forestry, Environment and Forestry already released data in 2018. It is around 3 million hectare peatland in Indonesia is as moderate until heavy damage. And in this year, in 2022, they also analyzed about peatland conditions in Indonesia, and it seems that the number of damaged peatland is much higher because there is a fire in 2019, and also there is continue opening canal block drainage system in peatland. So seeing this massive damage, we should continue to collaborate to restore our peatlands. And if there is a question about which is the important part about social, legal, and ecological, I think this three part is very important, because when we want to build canal blocking, we do FPIC also, prior informed consents to give some people to socialize to local people that we will build the canal blocking, and this canal blocking will increase their water level. In some part, the people deny about our restoration activity, and that's why the social intervention should be done in that part. So I think for restoration, peatland restoration, both social and ecological problems should be answered by us, and it takes collaborative actions with any other related stakeholder from university until government and also local people to bring together. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Gus Yassin. Stuart, you want to respond?
Yeah, I can respond briefly. I'll try. So I think in terms of the first question was to do with the alarming rate of degradation. Like, that's not really what we've studied here or part of the group. I think a lot of that's also there is a large amount of degradation that's also happened in the past. So that's what we're trying to tackle here and slow down the rate of future degradation. I try and remain positive, but it's some people struggle a little bit as well. So I can entirely sympathize with that. In terms of doing it more effectively, I think from the plant ecological perspective, that's kind of highlighted a lot in the presentation. So we've suggested areas where we can improve. So, you know, testing these treatments more effectively and then implementing them. Also putting more species in. So if we're only utilizing a very fraction of the diversity, there might be other species that are actually very good at initially colonizing these peatlands and surviving, and then that will facilitate further species to colonize. I think it's very interesting hearing other talks as well, because all these things need to be married up. So in terms of rewetting, you know, we found this small negative correlation, and that actually needs to be, you know, properly investigated to really kind of, because we need to rewet the peatlands, we need to reduce the fire risk, we need to involve the communities, and all of these things need to be married up. And I think we tried to do that as part of this project, but it as you know, Yuti, it's just very hard. So the more of these group conversations we have, the better. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Please, I want to say thanks again to our fantastic speaker, and also how they can highlighting like the importance of peatland restoration from different elements, because as you probably already heard, like rewetting is very important, but it's also create like a kind of like negative effect for the initial stage for revegetations, and how we can tackle it. It's need more research and also more collaboration. So thank you very much for Regnai, Estia, Pak Gus Yassin, and Stuart for the fantastic presentation. So I hand it over to Sally. And
Okay. Thank you very much, Mrs. Janice and Mrs. Yuti, for the very dynamic fruitful session of discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, now we are at the end of the whole agenda, the closing. Thank you to the speakers and workshop participants for joining us today. Stay healthy and have a great day. Selamat sore, good afternoon. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining.